Hey, it's Brock here from Rockhill Farms, and today I want to show you our homemade panel saw. Now, if you've watched the channel, you're probably aware that I have a manufacturing business up here in this shop, but I haven't really shown much about how we do things other than our homemade Craig drill press. Today I've got my dad with me because he designed the panel saw and that drill press, and so we're going to show you kind of how it's made and how we use it. So when we started this business, we knew we were going to process a lot of plywood, and trying to cut sheets of plywood on a table saw in volume just isn't practical. It also wasn't practical for us to try to buy a panel saw. They were a couple $1,000s. At this point, I could easily buy a panel saw for this job, but we've cut 100 sheets of plywood a week for 4 years on this saw with very little maintenance and very little issues, so I don't see a reason to upgrade it. Alright, so my dad built the saw and he's going to walk you through some of the finer points of it. It started off with just a simple wooden frame that holds the sheet. So maybe the first thing we'll show is just loading sheets onto it, and then we'll make a cut with the saw and then talk about kind of how it's built. So I can't tell you what it would cost you to build this saw from scratch. I can say that almost everything that went into it is stuff that we just already had laying around, like the pipe and some of the wood. And so we spent very little, maybe $100 or less. Alright, I didn't see you get out a tape measure. How did you know what size those sheets were?
We have preset stops. We run about 3 different basic cuts. One is 32, which is a third of a sheet. Then we cut a 30-inch cut and a 40-inch cut. And like I say, we've got preset stops for them. And they just set onto the saw. And each one of them has a fine-tuning adjustment bolt. So if something gets a little out of kilter, you can adjust it back to where it's the right size.
Alright, so this is the 32-inch stop. You just slide the sheet up against it and it'll hit right here, and you know you're 32 inches from the blade. If anything gets out of whack, you can adjust it like he was saying here. So if you're not making the exact same product over and over again, but you're doing more of a custom thing, you can do what we've done on our miter saw, which is to take a 3-foot metal rule and screw it down to the frame. And you could just as easily clamp a block at the mark that says 22 inches or 31 inches and slide up to that stop that is clamped on. So this is our miter saw, or one of our miter saws. It has that scale on the back and a block clamp to it. Now we use a lot of repeated measurements again here, so we clamp it there, and then for one part we use 1 stop and another part we use 2, and so we can do full sets of parts with only moving this clamp once. But this could be used if everything you cut was, you know, different lengths.
Alright, I built a carriage here that just rolls on casters. These casters are about $2 each. They're pretty inexpensive. This is just a black pipe. I think if I were to ever make another one, it would be better if it was square tubing. And also, I think if I built another one, I would make one side rigid and have the other one where I could fine tune and adjust it. Now, to make this easy to pass through the wood, you run a cable up and over pulleys with a counterbalance. I can move this saw up and down with one finger. And without the counterbalance, it would be a struggle to do.
And where you were talking about adjustment, that would be done where the pipe goes through the top and bottom boards. You could have an adjustment bolt up there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Something similar to what we use on our stops.
And the circular saw is just screwed to that bottom board, I believe. It's got one board like clamps onto it, right?
A board screws down over this lip here that holds it pretty rigid.
And
virtually all the saws have a folded up edge. It stiffens the metal, and I just cut a groove in the board. It sets over that lip and screws down. It holds it pretty secure.
That means when we saw up thousands of sheets, if we burn up a motor on a skill saw, we can just grab any other skill saw basically, and it's going to work with this setup.
Yeah, and you can get the saw at any hardware. You're not waiting 3 weeks to order some motor from China. That's actually been the best part of it. We have used a couple skill saws, and I've replaced a couple rollers. Inexpensive items, can get them anywhere. The counterweight is run on a 5/16 cable, and the pulleys that we use are actually garage door pulleys. They're a good wheel with a bearing in them. The metal that they've lasted. The first set I put on was a little cheaper and they didn't last very long. These have lasted about 3 years now with no trouble.
All right, so now another part of this that my dad kind of struggled with setting up was the bottom rail. Number one, it has to be a really hard wood because it's getting material slid across it a lot. And the other end actually has a metal channel with a piece of hardwood on it. But this has to have some degree of adjustment because over time, this wooden frame is going to get out of square a little bit and need adjustment. So I'm going to zoom in and try to show you where the adjustment is on this bottom rail. Alright, so here you can see the bottom rail that we load the wood onto. You can see this portion is metal, and that's because we are building this out of what we had and not spending any money on it. Ideally, this entire bottom rail would be metal, but however you build it, right behind where the cutout is for the blade has to be reinforced so that that is not a weak point. You can see down here, there's an adjustment bolt. This is a lag screw that creates a pivot point, and there is another adjustment bolt down at that end to keep this bottom rail perfectly perpendicular to the saw blade. When we first started using this panel saw, it seemed like we had to adjust these bottom bolts quite a bit to keep the saw square. Once we got to the point that we knew we weren't going to need to move it anymore, we went ahead and anchored the saw into the concrete. On the ends, we have small L brackets with concrete screws, and then on the back side, we have angle iron with larger diameter concrete anchors. Now that it's held in place, it doesn't require adjustment nearly as often. So if you're into woodworking and do-it-yourself projects, you should check out our video on this homemade pocket hole jig setup as well. It's a lot more efficient than anything else we have found. So we were just talking about making sure we covered everything that someone would want to know about this, and we just had a couple more points. One was the adjustment wrenches. We made all those bolts and nuts the same size, so we only need 2 wrenches and we hang them on the saw. And then Dad was going to tell you a little bit about what we're going to do for dust collection. We've been through the shop working on making everything in here hook up to dust collection, but we haven't got this one done yet. So, you want to kind of tell them what your plans are for that?
Yeah, if you run this, it becomes very apparent that most of the sawdust is coming from right here in this area. So my intention is to build a little wooden box here with a place to hook a dust port on and put the groove to help hold the saw right here in the side of the box. Then we'll run a flex pipe up on another or attached to this counterweight so that it'll move up and down with the saw freely.
So my original thought was that there are companies that make kind of a high dollar circular saw that has a dust collection port on the back. But if you've ever used a saw and hooked it up to a dust collector, you know that it gets a percentage of dust. Nothing's going to get 100%, but I think the box on the side that he's talking about will get a lot higher percent of the dust than you would get out of a port on the back of the saw.
And this is a $59 skill saw you can buy just about anywhere. And the ones with the special little chute are about $300, and you've got to order them or drive a long distance to find one. It's just a lot more practical to have something that is inexpensive that you can repair yourself.
So hopefully we've covered everything that you might want to know about our panel saw. We're really proud of it because, like I said at the beginning, It's been 4 years now, cutting at least 100 sheets a week on average, and it's held up and done a great job. So, I appreciate you taking the time to watch the video. In a minute, you'll see links on the screen to a couple more of our videos, and I'll see you next time.